Welcome to the Medieval Manor Fair project. Even though the big event is a month away, we have a lot of work to do in the meantime, and we're going to start with some research. In this lesson, we'll go over tools and resources, search strategies, project organization, and source evaluation to help you be successful in creating your manor. So the first stop on our research journey will be the Pathfinder that I've created for this project. This is probably your number one tool in research. And this Pathfinder can be found on the Grace Library website. If you go to the library website and select Researching, then select Pathfinders, you'll see this shield, and you can select Medieval Manor Fair to get to this Pathfinder. It is also located in the resources for Mr. Dewey, Mrs. Maloof, and Mr. Stoffaker's class. So once you get to the Pathfinder, on the left side, I've listed several databases and sources. And the middle is a brief description of what you might be able to find there and how to use them. And on the right, if you need to have a username or password in order to access them, I've listed it here. You can also access the public library databases, but you'll need to use your own public library card number and PIN in order to use those NC Live databases. I'm not going to go through those today, but if you would like help accessing them, please let me know and I'd be happy to help you. I'm actually going to start at the bottom of the Pathfinder with the Grace Library website. All of our medieval library books are currently in Mr. Stoffaker's room for the project. They will not be able to be checked out because I want everyone to be able to use them. But you can still look at the collection online here in Destiny, and I'm just going to go to the list view. You'll want to go ahead and log in. You just sign in with Google. It will connect you into to our Destiny library. So we're looking at medieval research. The really helpful thing about looking at these in Destiny, even though you can't physically, look through the books, you can get the citation for any of the books. So you select the book that you're using, and if you scroll down on the page, you'll see that you can get a citation here. So it's just as simple as copying that citation and then pasting it into your document. So that can be really helpful when you are doing your research. Just a little tip to keep in mind. I'm going to go back to the Pathfinder, and I want to take you into one of the databases. This is a new one that I added to our library collection this year, this ancient and medieval history database. I didn't feel like we had really strong resources available in the past. You can access this from the Pathfinder. Take a note of the username and password here on the Pathfinder. We're going to go ahead and link to that. It'll ask for the username and password. You can click Remember Me so that you won't have to log in every time. Once you're into the database, you can click on Browse, scroll down and select Medieval Europe. You'll see some major topics here on this subject. I would also recommend just searching with the search bar. Include the word medieval or Middle Ages in your search. Again, this is an ancient and medieval history database. And by typing medieval, you're narrowing down the topics. And if I say Europe, that also helps to narrow down topics because you'll find information about medieval history all over the world. And we're specifically researching medieval Europe. So once you've done that, then you can start to search for, maybe you want to look for your role in the manor. So if you're the Lord, or you're a knight, or a priest, or a serf, you might search serf, you might search peasant, you might search women or children. You could also search for topics that might be relevant. So, everybody's going to eat food. So what did they eat in the Middle Ages? What would they wear for clothing? What about farming or agriculture? What about houses or architecture? Just all the different things that you might look for information about that could be included in your journals. So maybe entertainment or medicine. I am kind of interested in the guilds, like the craft guilds and when that developed. So I could search for guilds and get more information about that. Or maybe I want the character that I'm creating to be a weaver and she's weaving fabrics and I want to know more information about that. So once you find a potential resource, so I'm going to take a look at this article on textiles and needlework in medieval Europe. You'll notice that words are highlighted. These are the words in my search. So I search medieval Europe weaving, and it's highlighting anytime those words appear. And you can turn that off up here if you'd like. It can be helpful, like if you were like, okay, where does it actually start talking about weaving? Okay, down here, a little further down in the article, it starts to talk about weaving. So that can be helpful. The first thing I would do, if you found an article that you think you want to use for your project, go ahead and get the citation first off. Go ahead and copy it. I'm using Command C, and then I'm going to go over to a new Google Doc and paste it in here. I'm going to call this my research notes. And I'm going to put my citation there, and then I'm going to just write some notes underneath it. I will come back later when I'm actually building my annotated bibliography and do the hanging indent and make sure all my formatting is correct. But for right now, I just want to take notes and associate them with the article. So that's the first thing I would do. The other thing that you could do is you can save the article to your Google Drive. So if I select Save to Drive, the first thing it wants me to do is sign in with Google. I'm using my Grace email address and my password just like I would anytime I'm logging into Google, and connect. And then if I click Save to Drive, it'll actually save this file, Textiles and Needlework in Medieval Europe, saving it to my Google Drive. And then I can view the record on Google Drive. It's going to open it here and show me, here's the article that I just created. If I want to know where that is located, it also created this folder called Infobase Databases. And these are the articles that I have saved so far. So I can go ahead and open that article here. I'm going to go ahead and paste that citation because I want it, just connected later. I might not remember in a week where I found this article. And so I'm pasting the citation right here so I have it. The advantage of saving to Google Drive is that I can, highlight and comment on things that I want to come back to. So maybe I want to highlight about this information about the different materials and the fact that trade help them get fabrics that might not be available close by. This little bit of information about the textile related labors being jobs that were available to women. I would maybe highlight that. Another piece of interesting information I found was where it was talking about dyeing fabrics down here, and how different dyes made fabric more expensive. And they had secret methods for dyeing fabric, but they actually had laws about who could wear which colors, which I found fascinating. So like the color red was really rare, it was really expensive. And so they had laws that said that people who were in the lower classes could not wear red. Only nobles could wear red. And the reality was that because those fabrics were so expensive, even if it wasn't a law, they couldn't really afford to wear it anyway. But I found that really interesting. And I think I would probably add that to my notes. So when it comes to taking notes, a couple things I would include. I'm going to just pay attention to the fact to where this came from. So I know it's from a database, but this database pulled this article. It's actually a chapter in a book. The book is Textiles and Needlework in Medieval History, and this one is specifically about medieval Europe. That information is really reflected in the citation, but I want to include something in my annotation about this being a chapter from a book on textiles during the Middle Ages. And I'm going to include that in my annotation. So I want to include that in my notes right here. Other things that I want to include would be some of these details that I found that, trade gave people access to different fabrics. And I would go ahead and list those because those would be details that might be helpful in my journal. I definitely want to include something about women being involved in weaving and some of these textile trades. So a few jobs available to women. And I would also include that information about laws restricting certain colors. I'm not going to spend a lot of time typing here. But I would come back to this and add some of those specific details that I want to incorporate into my journal entries or into my, my character profile. So those are all some pieces of information that I gathered from this database, and I added to my research notes. You can print articles from the database. I would just be mindful of how long the article is. This one is kind of a medium length. I have found some in here that are quite long. And so it might be better to save to drive and highlight and comment that way rather than printing, but that's up to you. You can also download a copy. Whatever you do, make sure you get the citation because you will need that later and it will save you time if you do it now. So that is the Ancient and Medieval History database. So another part of this project is going to be evaluating your sources. When you're using the databases, like I just showed you with the Ancient Medieval History database, you can trust that the information there is accurate because everything included in the database has been peer reviewed. When you're just doing a Google search, it's not that simple. You have to remember that anyone can add content to the web. Even you can add content to the web, and no one's going behind and verifying that the information being added is accurate or correct. Sometime within a certain website, they'll have reviewers and content managers, but no one is independently verifying or confirming the accuracy of information on websites. And so that job falls to you as a researcher. You always want to approach a website as a skeptic and look for evidence that it's reliable. And for this project, you're required to use at least 2 sources from a database and 2 sources that are websites. And I think you have to have 5 sources to begin with, and then maybe more later on. But at the very least, 2 of those have to be websites. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about how to evaluate websites. And these are the things that I would look for. You're going to ask if the information is relevant and useful. If you go to a website and it seems like the information isn't helpful, just stop there and move on. It's not worth spending any more time there. But if you look at the information and it seems like, okay, I think some of this could be useful, then you need to ask, well, what's the purpose of the website? Who wrote it? What kind of qualifications do they have? Who's the publisher? Are they reputable? And then another thing to look for is whether or not they provide references or links to sources. And sometimes that can answer the question about their qualifications or about it being reputable if they provide their sources. That's a good sign. So I'm just going to do a quick example here. One of the things that I was interested in as I was writing my research notes for this first source was this idea of guilds. And I was curious to find out more about that. I'm going to turn off my caps lock. Just going to try medieval guilds as a search. And so when I did this search for medieval guilds, I found this article here. I found a Wikipedia article, and actually, I'm going to stop there for just a second because Wikipedia can be a useful source. However, we don't want you to list Wikipedia as one of your main sources for this project. So if you go to Wikipedia, use it more as a launching point for finding other sources. So I'm just kind of scrolling down to the source list at the bottom, what sources they used or the person who put this together, and then maybe look at some of those sources. This can be a great place to um, gather information. So use Wikipedia as a jumping off point, as a source. Here's another one. Here's an article from World History Encyclopedia. One of the first things I'd notice is that they have this fundraiser on the first page, which just makes me kind of wonder, okay, who are they? What kind of organization? I would definitely be looking for an about page, and finding out more about them and what they do to determine if they are reliable. And I would go to that about. Fortunately, this article does give an author, so you could find out more information about him by clicking on his name. I'm going to close that little ad. So there's a lot of ads, or not a lot, but some that are popping up. So that is something that might concern me a little. I would probably include some of this information in my annotation as I am researching this particular source. And I would also look, I want to close that message. I would also look down to see what kind of sources he uses in order to evaluate whether or not this is reliable. So he does give a bibliography here at the bottom, and he has a little more information about himself too. So I would say probably reliable. The ads would probably kind of bug me a little bit, but it doesn't seem to, as far as I can tell, seems like it's fairly reliable. But I would definitely go in and look at the about information just to see who it is that's publishing this World History Encyclopedia. Um, so then there's probably a lot of other resources. This is another one that I wanted to call your attention to that I found in my first search. And this one just pulled up a PDF. And so, how do I know if this is reliable? And how do I cite it? I would probably cite it using the Google citation tool. Right now, I'm just going to put a link here, URL link, so that I know what source was for my initial note-taking part. I recognize that I would need to come back and actually create an MLA citation for that later on if I decide to use this source. But in evaluating it, I would look through, I noticed that there's an author, actually a primary author and then a secondary author. So I would make sure that my citation included both of their names. It appears that this is part of a publication called Social Education. Also appears that it's produced by the National Council for the Social Studies. So that sounds somewhat reputable. The fact that it's actually published source makes it stand out as being reputable. They seem to have some education tools there. But I also noticed at the end that they have notes with links to sources. And then there's also this little bio at the bottom that gives me some information about who these people are that wrote the article. So all of those things I would use together to say that this is probably reputable. But part of my annotation for my annotated bibliography is going to be why I think this is reputable. So things that I would include in that are that it's this article is published by, and then what name was that? The National Council for the Social Studies. So I would be putting this kind of information in my notes because I would want to include it then in my annotated bibliography. I would include some information about these two authors down here on this page. So I would go ahead and add that. So I've just added that little piece of information about who these two professors were. And my citation will be there, so it'll include both of their names, but I could also include that in my note. You could do it either way. William Bosshart and Jane S. Lopez. So those are the two authors. And then I would go through that article. So those would be pieces of information. Let's say they provided sources, links, almost like their own little bibliography. And those sources had some links. So all of those things I would include together as making this a reputable and reliable source. From there, I would go into this document and look for the details and pieces of information that I think are helpful. They talk about guilds here. Guilds in medieval Europe could be classified into two types, craft guilds and merchant guilds. So I'd probably put a note about that. And I would just continue to go back and forth from this source, kind of capturing those details. One that I found interesting, also things that I think might be helpful for my project. So I notice here it says apprenticeships often began at age 12, commonly lasted from 2 to 7 years. Apprentices frequently lived at their master's house, were given room and board, but earned no money. So, like that detail could be interesting to include in my research notes because um, I could incorporate that into my journal. So maybe my character was an apprentice and lived with a craftsman, or that kind of thing. So I would just continue to, just like I did up here, write down the details from this article that I found helpful. So I'm kind of doing two things at once when I'm doing my notes. I'm evaluating my sources. I'm answering these questions about, is it relevant and useful? What's its purpose? Who wrote it? Do they provide links to sources? So I've answered those questions. And then I'm also capturing the details that are important. All of those pieces will later be used to create my annotation for my annotated bibliography. So that's just a quick summary of how to evaluate sources. You will have some more time to just kind of practice that. Again, look to answer those questions as you are evaluating your sources, particularly those that you're just finding on the web. For the most part, those in databases, these things are already being checked by the publishers of the database. But for websites, you need to be asking those questions yourself.